Welcome to the Powered by Age-Friendly City Zoomcast reality-style podcast.
We are movers and shakers, shaking up the old notion of silent, helpless, invisible seniors.
This is a new series of podcasts funded by the City of Vancouver and the 411 Senior Center Society.
As PBA AFC ambassadors, we
raise awareness,
share our original stories and poems,
inform, advocate, and involve seniors in discussing important social issues.
In short, these podcasts will help us,
you, in creating an age-friendly city for Vancouver today,
tomorrow the world.
You can hear us everywhere podcasts are heard. Okay, hello. Welcome to Powered by Age-Friendly City. This is a living, breathing reality podcast, and it's a podcast that is senior-led. We've started off meeting in 411 Center, and now we are meeting as a committee, a table of the round, like people from each place not having to travel 2 hours to get here, people who had just begun having small group meetings, small group planning times for what would go on, and then waiting. We each week have some people that have invited people as an interviewee to talk about a topic. At the end of the meeting, we have people who volunteer for either stories or poems that they're going to bring. So it is a living, breathing, emerging process that you will be able to share with us as we go forth toward October, where we'll have a big celebration of all the podcasts we've done for International Seniors Day. So I'm Charlotte Farrell, the coordinator and host, and each week we ask the people that are on the line to briefly introduce themselves. So we'll start with Ellen.
Hi, how are you, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah, my name is Ellen. I'm from Surrey. I'm retired too, but I still have to work. I have part-time because you know when you're senior, right? My pension is not enough, so I have to do some part-time job. So I do financial assistance, and it's lockdown, so I'm staying home. Can't find clients because I have to be home. I have to look after them, my clients, and myself too, right? So stay home, but it's better for me because I did lots of things, and I want to thank COVID-19 because I was able to clean the house, which I forgot. I have less time to do it when I was working, right? And I was able to do some gardening, most of my garden, right? All my flowering plants, they're all in bloom, which is nice. And when my daughter got married, she got that bouquet thing. I dried it to put it on the frame, right? But it was hanging there for so long. And then when COVID-19 came, I was able to frame it. So I was so happy, just in time for my daughter's anniversary in June. So I have something special for her coming up. Yeah, that's me, Ellen.
Wonderful. Chris?
Yes, my name is Chris Morrissey, and I'm from East Van, and I'm a member of Quirky, which is the Queer Imaging and Writing Collective for Elders. I know it's funny letters, Quirke or something. They don't actually match with the spelling, but we decided we were quirky. So I'm from East Van. I'm retired as well, and I moved into on the east side fairly recently. I should say I moved back to the east side fairly recently. So I'm quite happy to be back here. And one of the things that I do is I do a lot of volunteer work with LGBTQ refugees, both those who are here in Canada and those who are still overseas. And one of the things that COVID-19 has given me is, even though in my head I know that there are so many people who are worse off than I am, it's in my head. But having to go through this of being shut up and not seeing anybody, but at the same time knowing I have a roof over my head, I have food on my table, and I think about the thousands of people who are not, and it's different from having it in the head to actually experiencing it or feeling it. So while I'm not grateful to COVID-19 for all of the people it's killing, I am grateful at least to be able to find something that's
Something to do.
positive. Well, it's not positive for them, but at least it changes my outlook a bit.
Similar to Ellen, getting things done that have been sitting over to the side for a while. Leslie.
Yes, my name's Leslie Hebert, and I live in New Westminster. I teach English as a second language online, so that really hasn't changed for me during the lockdown. I'm also a writer, a member of the Royal City Literary Arts Society, and a member of the New Westminster Council of Women. Good things about the lockdown, I've discovered Zoom.
Sylvie.
Hi, I'm Sylvie Anderson. I'm from the West End Seniors Network. And it's a banner day for most people in the West End today. After 3 years, the new Safeway has opened on Davy and Cardero, which is about half a block from where I live. So it makes my shopping expeditions way easier than going all the way over to Robson Street. Yeah. As far as COVID-19, I have met so many more people in the virtual world that as a die-hard introvert, I would have met in my own habitat. So yeah, it's been good. I've met a lot of people.
Sharon.
Hi, actually, I go by my middle name, Judith or Judy.
Okay.
So I'm Judith Rainey, and I live in the South Granville area, so I'm connected to the South Granville Senior Center. I am grateful for the fact that while people are defining their bubbles, who's in their bubble, I have increased mine. And I'm really grateful for discovering that. And I am also grateful for Zoom meetings. They're really challenging and fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Stephen has come on the line. Stephen, he's introducing himself, and as part of the introduction, telling something that they have gained from this self-isolation or being shut in. Ishmael Traore, say your name correctly for me, Ishmael.
It's Ismail Traore. Traore.
Okay, so introduce and tell us something about yourself.
Well, Ismail Traore, I was born in Burkina Faso, which is a country in West Africa, right above Ghana. And I've been in Canada for I believe 15 to 18 years, within that ballpark. Started off in Ontario, where I was an undergraduate student and then a graduate student in 2 different universities, and then moved to the Okanagan's to get away from the noise of the big cities. And then found myself in another big city in Vancouver years later, after leaving the Okanagan's. And currently I work at UBC at the Center for Community Engaged Learning. I am the engagement advisor over there. I pretty much run a program that is responsible for bringing university students and community members together in order to tackle a social pressing issue in our community. And I got in touch with Powered by Age as a result of the Vancouver Plan initiative that we were doing at UBC, where we were holding consultations mainly with UBC stakeholders, but also community members that wanted to participate to share their voice and perspective on some of the Vancouver Plan questions. One great thing about, I won't say the pandemic, but definitely quarantine, is I believe Ellen mentioned, is I personally save 3 hours of travel. I'm commuting home to work each day, which comes out to about a little bit more than a full day a week. So that's, so I save pretty much 15 hours a week because I'm not commuting, and been using these 15 hours for other things. One of them, again, like Ellen, is developing my brown thumb. Hopefully it's going to go green soon. I've been having a love and a not so loving relationship with my Echeveria plant, elephant bush. They're being a little bit stubborn. Or maybe I'm just not patient enough. I'm not sure. Ellen mentioned as a senior, she has less patience. I'm not sure if that will be my case. I'm already struggling with patience when it comes to my plants. Another thing is, because I have more time on my shoulder, I've been able to exercise more. And, because the gym is literally just downstairs, I go from one room to my living room, and there we go. So I don't have an excuse to say that I can't go to the gym anymore. Not that I had an excuse before. It's just now I have more time. So I will say those are some of the better highlights of quarantine.
Okay, and we're going to be coming back to you. Many of you don't know, we interacted with Ishmael the very first podcast because he had sent me some questions. The city had an opportunity for us to participate in a discussion around what we want to see in the city plan. And it was 4 questions, and I said, people are never going to write the answers to all these questions. So we asked 2 of them at our first one, and that was when we discussed how safe do you feel in Vancouver, and we asked the question that he had about culture. What do you think about culture that's available in Vancouver? So a couple of the questions later he'll share with us so that everyone will get to interact. And it was so much better than writing down and sending a document with people's answers to organically hear what people had to say. But I'm going to bring in Stephen. Stephen is one of the people that joined through our visits to centers, and it's the first time you've been on our reality style show. So introduce yourself.
Yes, okay. My name's Stephen Hardy, and yes, I'm a member of the Quirky Writing Group, which you may have heard of. And so I'm a friend of Chris Morrissey, which I guess you know. She's here today. And I just got interested in this, I guess, from your presentation to us. And then with the COVID and everything got kind of scuttled. And so I didn't have a chance to log in, but I'm glad that I got a phone call from Robin a few days ago, and she encouraged me to just check in. So that's what I'm doing. And so my background, basically, I'm retired. I used to teach engineering actually at Simon Fraser University, but I'm retired from that now and just kind of relaxing and doing things I want to do. So that's about all I need to say right now, but we'll get to know me a little later as the podcasts progress.
Okay, and by saying that you were an engineer, we have some people on the line who were retired from teaching, engineering, broadcasting, and among the topics that we're going to be inviting people to come in and answer questions are training programs. That there are a lot of training programs who are for people to get back into technology, but they end at 60. And so those of us who are over 65, we're asking, okay, why don't you have the tuition waiver? There are not tuition waivers for a lot of the programs that would help people either get back into technology or training for other areas, customer service. There are a lot of things seniors can do. And at each center, people raise one of the things that we want to change in the current paradigm or in the current perception is that seniors who want to go back to work or older people who want to go back to work should just be volunteers or be paid a high school student's salary. So we are going to be raising those questions with people from the parts of the government that deal with it. So as I've mentioned, we're going to have people from 411, people from other places, such as Chris, who have contact with senior advisors, contact with people that on the city of Vancouver, who that's their portfolio or that's their interest area. We will have them on as a guest so that each of us who have those similar questions could ask them. And also, this group has looked at how we can be advocates. Whenever we have someone speak, we ask them if there's a call to action, if they'll give their email address, if there's a letter to be written, what's a call to action for something that we can do rather than to just hear. So we welcome your art. I know Quirky has got a book out, and Pat and Chris have both shared stories they've written, but we also welcome you to read other people's stories, because we also as a group are publicizing or supporting, talking about things that people are doing. We have one member, Emily, who's written a book. So as things emerge, you'll have an opportunity to do a story, talk about your book. If you've got a new course, this is a place and a platform for letting people know, both the people that are participating in the podcast, but also our listeners, because we do have listeners. I've had people calling me. I had a lot of phone calls on Monday after Luke got up and sent out the first 4 of our podcast. And then there have been other people that have wanted to have their students on, like this is a class. And I said, no, they can't come on and watch us as a class, but we'll have a podcast with them and see what skills they want to add. Like we have, out of the 40 some people, there are only about 10 that have either learned how to get onto Zoom or identified another issue that I spoke with someone about yesterday. The phone bills are too high. Some people have not been able to afford their phone bills. So they've talked about, is there a need to ask Shaw, Rogers, the other companies to have a special package for seniors? And if there are people that have gently used phones, people, some people, as soon as a new phone comes out, they put down a perfectly good phone and jump. So this particular woman is going to ask among her network if there are people that have phones that they might donate. We do have people donating. The 411 Center got a donation of computers, and the very week we were going to hand them out was the week that the center had to stop because of safe distancing. But we are definitely seeing that that's going to be something that we will be discussing and seeing, somebody just looking at how we can advocate for that. So Ishmael, do you want to share a couple of those other questions that you wanted to have feedback from our group on? Oh, we can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Hi.
Okay.
Absolutely. I was saying that as a caveat, it's important for me to mention that I am not employed. I'm not an employee. I'm not a contractor of the city of Vancouver. I simply got in touch with them last summer to explore opportunities for students and other stakeholders in the university to be involved with any pressing local issues, of which the Vancouver Plan, as I came to learn, was one. And embedded in the Vancouver Plan initiative is that Vancouver Plan staff want to and see the benefit of collaborating with other organizations or groups in order to have these conversations. And so my role at Cecil, where I work, was simply to invite people, especially those in the university, to come and have these conversations. It is my understanding that the city, the Vancouver Plan staff, would prefer to work directly with the different groups and different organizations because a different approach may be necessary as they work with different groups and different organizations. And so my suggestion would be that it will be best for you to directly get in touch with the Vancouver Plan staff themselves, develop that relationship, and see what questions they may have that is more pertinent to your group, if that's where they are at. And so the questions that I have were suggested by the Vancouver Plan teams, Vancouver Plan staff, and they had a variety of questions, of which we chose 5 for the stakeholders at UBC. So the extent to which it would be relevant for you, I am not too sure, which is why it's always better to have that direct relationship with the Vancouver Plan staff. But since we are here, I'm sure that some of the questions that I have, and that the 2 that you have already spoke about, are close to heart. And so please let me know if any of these questions are not close to heart and are not relevant. Now, ultimately, what happens is we collect these information and we write a report based on the information that we've collected. And then we send that to the Vancouver Plan staff for them to use in their broader analysis of what stakeholders and residents and others are saying when it comes to their questions. And so, since Powered by Age is an organization that has its own mandates, that has its own stakeholders, and its own direct relationship with the city, it will not be the best approach for us to add your information into our report. But because this is recorded, I will be more than happy to connect you, Charlotte, with somebody from the Vancouver Plan staff, and you can provide them the recordings of the answers so that they can use it in their analysis and report. How does that sound?
Well, it sounds good that we are able to discuss it in this format, because I didn't say at the beginning, this project, Powered by Age, Age-Friendly City, is the second year of our podcasting, and it's funded by the City of Vancouver and the 411 Center. And one of the specific purposes was to elicit what older people would like to see as a profile, the changed profile for Vancouver. And they didn't specifically say it's going in the city plan, but I know all of these initiatives, there's a larger initiative that the City Planning Council had of a city that works for all. So in as much as we discuss it here, and there are people from those different city elements listening to our podcast, then it is a good way for us to maybe if you share what 3 of those are that were not answered, or we can find out from this group, are there things that they want to address? And it's good that it will go into your report, and then it also is a recording of our program. It'll also get to them as well.
Yeah. So just to reiterate, is that the conversation on the Vancouver Plan questions that I have that is happening on this podcast, I would suggest that we send directly the raw data, meaning the recordings, to the Plan team staff, and they will be able to analyze it and put it in their report. Because the expectation is that the report that is being created at Cecil is a report that is specifically about what the UBC stakeholders are predominantly saying. I think it'll be better to differentiate the 2, because there's some concerns and wisdoms and insights and experiences that seniors have that other people may not have to the same extent or different, that would get lost if we take your responses and put it in. So here's what people at UBC are saying. I think the value of your information will get lost simply by the sheer number of the people that we have that participated in our consultations. and I'll be more than happy to broker that relationship and connect you directly with staff in the Vancouver plan. In regards to the questions, I have some questions, and I will list the 3 questions, and then we can decide as a group which one you would like to have a conversation on first. Can you tell me the time that you have for the Vancouver Plan question conversations?
We have about 20 minutes.
Okay, so maybe we can do roughly seven minutes per question.
Okay.
And being mindful as well that ever since COVID-19 happened, I'm sure the Vancouver Plan team have other questions and other priorities, but we will go with the questions that we had prior to COVID-19. So you already had a conversation about the first question, which is, what do you need to feel safe in Vancouver, correct?
Yes, that and the culture question we discussed.
Okay, the culture question was, what would arts and culture look like in an ideal Vancouver? So here are the other 3 questions, and we can start with whichever one you would like. The first is, what would a thriving relationship between nature and urban life look like in Vancouver? What would a thriving relationship between nature and urban life look like in Vancouver? That's the relationship between the city and the environment. The second question is, what would a city that truly adopts reconciliation and decolonization look like? What would a city that truly adopts reconciliation and decolonization look like? And finally, what are the characteristics of a healthy workforce and workplace? What are the characteristics of a healthy workforce and workplace? So of these 3, which would you like to start off with first?
Okay, any one of you can answer. What would be your favorite to start with?
Well, I think we could spend a whole session on any one of these.
But what would be your favorite? If there were one you were going to start with right now, what would be your preferred?
Well, we've all been talking about gardening, so probably the nature one.
I think the urban nature, yeah, I like that one too.
Okay, so I will put these questions on the chat just in case any of you needs to refer back to it. So
okay.
So here comes the first question, and popcorn style, feel free to share whenever, in any particular order, or maybe Charlotte, do you want to facilitate? I can just ask.
Oh no, you can facilitate just in whatever order people want to address that question.
Okay, so what would a thriving relationship between nature and urban life look like? When you think about the environment and the city, anything from parks to access to nature, the transit that takes us there, their proximity to where we live, the types of vegetations or ecology that we have, anything that speaks to mind to you, that comes to mind to you when it comes to nature and urban life in Vancouver. What would one that is ideal look like for you, that is thriving look like for you?
I kind of have I grew up in London, England, and when I came to Vancouver, I was very impressed with how there was a balance here so much compared to where I grew up. So I see there are a lot of positives in Vancouver already. To keep it thriving as Vancouver has developed, I think we are in danger of losing that. But to keep Vancouver green, to keep urban wildlife thriving, to encourage urban gardening, allotments, that kind of thing. There are a lot of park spaces. I think we should try to maintain and enhance those. But I think Vancouver already has done a lot of positive things. It's a matter of looking at it and supporting that and not losing it as the city grows.
Can you tell me more about what you mean enhancing and supporting the existing green spaces?
Well, there are, in Vancouver, there are a lot of green spaces on two levels. Okay, so on one level, we still have a lot of single family houses that have backyard gardens. There's a lot of those in East Van, the old Italian communities especially. As real estate becomes much more expensive, people are moving out of single family houses. They're moving into condos and apartments. So, the individual family is perhaps losing that chance to have their own garden. So perhaps supporting that with a community garden space perhaps would be one thing. And then on the sort of the higher level, the parks, the city parks that we have that are quite lovely, just to keep funding them and, keep maintaining them and not letting them shrink. There could be a chance as Vancouver grows to actually cut back on some of the park space and turn it into real estate. I think that would be very sad.
Chris?
Just a little jumping off from that, I agree that the development is really making a huge difference in Vancouver. And I also agree that, one of the things, the Vancouver Public Library has done a rooftop garden. And so I'm wondering whether in terms of development and development plans that they actually require developers to have some sort of green space or I don't know how it would work on a tall tower, but that there's something that's built into that development that does include some green space. The other thing that I lived for 4 years on the west side and I came back to the east side. Trees. There are very few trees on the east side. On the west side, you drive down a street and there's trees on both sides. They've been there for a long time. They're large, they're beautiful. Some of them are flowering, but on the east side, not at all. And I lived on the east side before this for like 20 some years. So I'm quite familiar. So I think that there does need to be more development of things on the east side. Yes, there's a couple of parks. There's the Grandview Woodlands Park, and there's the one on Kensington Park, I think it is. But there's not as many, and there's not kind of some of the smaller kind of parks that I've seen on the west side. So it doesn't have to be a huge expanse, but having something that's more local and that maybe is smaller, because unless you live near those parks, people are not necessarily going to have the time or the energy to be going to those parks, especially with their kids. So that's my thought. 2 of them.
I worked in Toronto and in a period where there were a lot of council people who were advocating for keeping some green space, and the health department supported or was an advocate for people who wanted to do what they call vest pocket parks, kind of what you were talking about. It's not a great big space, but just a space at the end of a street where there's a place for people to walk around, there's some tables, just a gathering space, so that you didn't have to think of clearing a huge area, but you could just have these vest pocket parks every few blocks or so people could get out and both congregate as well as see flowers or whatever.
I think there are some pocket parks in Vancouver. I've seen a couple on the west side, but the other piece about pocket parks is they have to be a big park, a big pocket, right? Because to have a couple of tables and something like that is not, it's okay, but I think we need to sort of strike a bit of a balance between the amount of space that's used for development and the amount of space that's used for enhancing our lives.
Yeah, and absolutely, and just following up and reminding as well that in having a conversation about nature, that there's the green spaces and there's also the waters, there's also the land, there's also the air. Is our air clean enough, and all these other things. And so just letting you know that this word nature can be unpacked in whatever way you would like to take it.
We had talked about money and how the cost of living in Vancouver, and I live in the area around 29th in Fraser, and houses all along these blocks, most of them are 3 stories, and they've been developed so that they're rentals, and people have a balcony. And I would love to be able to go to someplace. I wonder, what does the city do with the compost? If there were a way you could get a little compost, almost like a kit, so that you could, on your little balcony space, set up a growing area for spices, herbs, maybe, the miniature cucumbers, but just something that people could get that would be just like a little grower's box, and it would have the dirt, maybe some compost and some seeds, and you could take it home and be able to easily set it up on your back porch, or the little bit of the city could help us to have. I would think that would be very environmentally, friendly, and also help economically.
Are there any additional comments to this question? My timer just rang that we've had 7 minutes, but I think this is one of those questions that people really want to get involved. So
I'd like to make one more comment that's kind of based on what Charlotte has just said, and that is the paving over of backyards. So many backyards these days are just paved and used for parking. And so I agree with whoever said something about the Italians and the backyard gardens, because I used to live in that area and there were a lot of them. But nowadays, most things, I think there's an issue with the parking, but that means that the land gets covered over with cement. Is there a song about that? I think, doesn't Judy Collins have a song?
Yellow Taxi.
A parking lot.
Yeah, the big yellow taxi.
Yes. So that's just another thought. I mean, in terms of development plans and things like that.
Yeah, I've noticed that with new houses as well, particularly maybe not so relevant to the East End, but I've noticed, I live here in New Westminster, and new houses that go up, I mean, they're mega houses, they're made with, like 2 basement suites or whatever, but the whole yard is parked in cement, covered in cement. And it's done, I think, because it's convenient for the homeowner. They don't have to garden. But that could, city regulations could maybe speak to that.
Yeah.
That, they talk about the footprint of the house, but they don't talk about the surrounds of the house, how much can be under cement and how much can be grass or should be grass.
And in fact, cement is unhealthy. Walking on cement pulls nutrients out of your body. So little kids are out there playing on it. As I've seen, looking out when I go out to bang my pots, and there are people along the back, that there are a lot of little kids, and that there's just all this cement. So that
and incredibly hot in the summertime. We have actually a new house next door to us, which has kind of reminded me of this. There was a small house there before. They had trees in the backyard. When the people moved into the new house, they cut down all the trees. And we said to him at the time, this is going to be very hot. And he didn't listen. And then, of course, he was complaining it was hot. And then he had to build a kind of a patio thing to create shade. Whereas he could have just left the trees and left, not cemented it. It's just, and then global warming, right? The more cement you have, the more hot your area becomes.
Yeah.
I have a related follow-up question, which is have you seen any difference in how you experience and use, so to speak, nature when you became a senior? In other words, is there a way that seniors understand, or something they want out of their experience with nature or concerns about nature that may be different from when you were not a senior, or maybe different from the present concerns that non-seniors have?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think I feel more connection to nature now. Maybe it's a factor of time, that I'm spending more time in the garden, more time just walking, just for pleasure, rather than to go somewhere. more awareness perhaps, and also a concern for future generations. What's the world going to be like in 30 years' time?
What do you think, Stephen?
Sylvie?
Okay, I'll just say a few words on that, Charlotte. I think that basically, if we back up a little bit, and as a senior, I'm outside of the sort of the economic whirlpool that I was in when I was earning a living and working. So I am able to step outside of that box and see a little bit about where this has all come from and why these urban slums, in fact, that we live in are so dehumanizing for us. And I think I'm Métis, and I'm also two-spirited, and of course, and I think that basically that's given me a bit of a different perspective. When I was young, I saw very much what rural life was like, and I can imagine what a humanizing city would be like that would in fact promote the humanizing values of the population instead of trying to emotionally pave us over with concrete. And I think that basically we have to approach it from the point of view of looking at what the economic situation is that we're enmeshed in and changing that and making some changes in what we can do with the means of production and the situation we're in. I mean, why does the mayor find it necessary to meet with the planners and developers and the development community so much? Why is that? And why is he not spending same amounts of time with ordinary people? And so when I supported him for mayor, I was really hopeful that this was going to turn out, and that he was in fact going to get away from the development mindset. But no, it's not happened, and so we're living in just the same sort of urban slum that we always did in Vancouver, and it's not getting better. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth right now. So I'll press mute and let someone else talk.
Yeah, well, actually, I agree with a lot that you say, Stephen. For me, I think because I'm older, I have definitely had a shift in priorities. And things that were not important to me when I was 30 or 40 or even 50 are important to me now. And this connection, I think, with the simple things in life, that's one of them. It brings me joy to walk down the side streets in the West End, like Bidwell Street or Cardero Street, or they're beautifully treed, old trees down those streets. And at this time of year, the birds are just, it's a cacophony of noise, and I just love it. I love to walk down there and hear it. It just uplifts my spirit. So if I had said that to myself 30 years ago, would I have had the same experience? Doubtful, really doubtful. And I think that's as a result, a natural result for me of getting as old as I am, because I've learned to appreciate these things. I talk on my walks down those streets, I talk to everything. I talk to squirrels, I talk to dogs, I talk to young children. And it's part of my daily, or it has been until the last couple of months, part of my daily routine. So I'm not quite sure if that answers your question, whether, what comes first, the chicken or the egg. But for me, that's how it is, that I have developed a greater affinity for simple things, for being aware of things around me. So, and I'm very, very fortunate, I will say that I do live in the West End. It's a beautiful place. And even though it's going under some severe densification at the moment, which, life, I guess, progress, life goes on. But nevertheless, I do think the city has made an attempt to preserve some of the feel of the place. Most of the high rises that are going up around here, they do have space on the 15th floor for gardens, for trees, and on the roof, that kind of thing. There are pocket parks in the West End, which do attract birds and various animals. Skunks a lot of times, which are not so welcome, but you know, it does. It's kind of a very live environment. So the thing is that I think these kind of areas are confined to maybe the West Side or the West End, and that they don't exist to the same extent elsewhere in the city.
Yeah.
And that's too bad. I think this could be sort of a template.
Well, I think you're right that they
high rises, but
they don't exist in other parts of the city. And one reason they exist here in the West End, where I'm living too, one reason is that the zoning regulations have prevented the densification any more than it is. But all it would take would be a one-line change in the zoning bylaws for the West End, and the cranes would move in the next month. That's all it would take. All it would take would be to remove the height restrictions. So it's a fine line between what you and I both love about about some aspects of an urban environment and what it could become very, very easily.
Yeah, it's true. Life is a fine line, though.
Yes,
there are always
indeed
those four, and we're always competing interests. Can't avoid it. But I appreciate what you're saying. I would hate for there to be like 50-story buildings go up around here. It would destroy it.
Well, Ellen, what do you think?
Of nature. That's why, you know, where I live in Surrey, it's surrounded with lots of trees, right? A few years ago, our, you know, where I live, the backyard is lots of trees in there, and then, the mayor tried to, you know, put a road in between inside the park. So we were all a little mad that way, because, you know, they're cutting some of the trees, right? But now they planted some trees, and so the park, it has a new say, it's not they renovated it, but when they put the road inside the park, they still planted more trees beside. So I'm a little happy now, not like before 2 years ago, you know, we were all doing our best not to have those trees cut for the road, but well, we don't know what to do, right? So it's the mayor's decision, so you just let it go. Yeah, but it's good now. It's trees growing now. I can, you know, have some fresh air to breathe, and I love when there are lots of trees. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting, as many people have mentioned trees. You know, from a health standpoint, trees help clean the air. They help with our lungs. They help with breathing. They help with the cooling. So I think being advocates for, we hear that there are measures that a city council or any group is discussing, that we can share the information so that we can go to those meetings. Because as we were developing a strategy for how do we make the voices of older people, seniors, or people over 55, however we want to characterize ourselves, known, it's to be active in community meetings. And a lot of times we're not there, right. And then there are other people that are just guessing. So all of us have looked at this podcast and other virtual communications people have as a way of sharing when there's a meeting or an opportunity to weigh in on discussions about zoning, or weigh in on discussions about parks, or making trees available. There was a news item on the weekend about a group that did their fundraising. They had trees, baby trees, and they went to a housing development and they planted trees all along the way. And the owners of the development were so happy. They had staff out helping, you know, with shovels and dirt, so that they were able to plant some 30 trees around. And they said over time, people will be able to come out and they can get fruit. So it helps with the food insecurity issue if we can have more fruit trees around in urban places.
So as Leslie mentioned, any of these questions, or Sylvie, we can really unpack it a little bit more, and maybe when you reach, and when I introduce you to the Vancouver Plan staff, maybe they will have additional questions or follow-up questions regarding any of the things that were mentioned here. But for the sake of time, I wonder which of the remaining question, there's two more, you would like to explore. So the second question is, what would a city that truly adopts reconciliation and decolonization look like? And the other one is, what are the characteristics of a healthy workforce and workplace? Now that last question was particularly chosen for a section of the population that is going into work or that is currently working. There may be some of you that are still working at a different capacity, or that could also be an opportunity for reflecting over how the workforce and the workplace has changed over time, and maybe you have some insights and some hopes and wishes to share. And also the topic of reconciliation and decolonization is a very important topic as we prioritize in the city and other places of Canada our relationship with the First Peoples of this land. So which of these two topics would you like to explore in the remaining, I guess, 7 minutes? Is that it?
Well, don't all talk at once. Which one would you rather?
I'm just not sure we'll be able to do any of them justice in 5 minutes.
Well, we could begin if someone has a particular one that you want to comment on.
Or alternatively, if you have a suggestion of a new question that you think is more pertinent to this group, we can also explore that. But those are just
I would like us to, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in this podcast, but the whole issue of reconciliation and decolonization, I mean, I that's a really, really significant and important thing. And I struggle, at every meeting and stuff, we do the statement that we're on unceded territory. But beyond that, I find it difficult to understand or to see, because we're in a culture that is so, I'm just going to say, so westernized. I mean, our culture, the culture that was here in this land and that's still in parts of this land, is totally foreign to most of us. So I don't quite know what direction to go in, or how, what to do. I know on one of the feeds that I'm on, I have a whole reading thing of decolonization, which I haven't read yet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. I looking at, because of my upbringing, because I look at everything from a WASP perspective, because that's how I was raised. If you suggested to me that I was discriminatory, I would be absolutely horrified. Mm-hmm. But the truth of the matter is that we have biases that we're totally unaware of. I remember when I first came to BC, I'd been in Canada in the East for about a year, and I was working in Prince George. And one day, my boss, I was working in a law firm, said, "Come on, Sil, I'm going to take you to the Inn of the North for a drink on a Friday afternoon." His name is Murray Sadler, and he was a lawyer in Prince George for a long time. And we got to talking about, for example, residential schools. I honestly hadn't really thought about the ramifications of that. What does that mean to the people? I thought, oh well, Indigenous people in Canada live, in remote areas, and this is the way they do things. This is how their kids get to go to school. And it was Murray Sadler who gave me the first lesson that I had about how that was really breaching people's human rights. And I had never, ever looked at it from that perspective before. And I think that's the problem, Chris. It's basically, we don't know what we don't know. So the question is better put to indigenous people than to Westerners, Europeans. How do they see it? Because I'm at a loss too. I wouldn't know what to do because I'm not aware of, I'm just not aware. So I agree with
Sylvie,
you. Yeah.
For the people that do not know what WASP means, what does that mean?
It means white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant.
Protestant.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I agree. The only thing is that when I think back to a lot of the anti-oppression work, I've been told by people who belong to those groups, including the group that I belong to, that it's up to us to do. It's up to me as a WASP. I'm not a WASP because I'm not a Protestant, but it's up to me to actually do my own education. I think it's one thing to invite people to talk about these things, but it's not their job to educate us. So, I mean, I learned that principle in terms of racism and that kind of thing. So I think I would suggest that we need to do some of our own work first, and then we could be in a more respectful position to actually invite someone, whether it's here or somewhere else, to actually share a bit more with us. Because we could say, I don't understand such and such, and then maybe they could explain it to us. Like, I don't understand the powwows, or I don't understand the sweat lodges, can you tell me more about that? So I think at least we'd be coming from a place of more information and more knowledge, rather than just putting out and saying, well, I don't know anything about decolonization. That's what I've learned. I mean, I think it's right that it is important to have some consultation, but I think they go hand in hand.
Well, one comment I have as a Black woman who has had kind of the experience from one hand where people wanted me to be their source of information on what was my experience, what does it feel like? And there are some things that people could know by just reading the history of Canada or paying attention for some things. But on the other hand, one of the goals for this podcast was to include people of different races, different ages, and have indigenous people involved. So, and also to dispel the notion that indigenous people are just people that are outside, but right in the urban area, right in the workplace, there are issues that people have. And so I have reached out. Last year, there was an Indigenous Film Festival. It was wonderful. It was held on, I think, many of the spaces that Simon Fraser has in downtown theaters. And the films that people showed were great because some of them were showing ways that Indigenous people are helping young people that grew up in an urban area, know nothing of customs. They were taking them on a boat ride, and along the boat ride, they saw how people used to greet people when they would come aboard on the shore. But it was such a diverse range of films that helped with all of the issues that we are discussing, the residential schools and why that's still an issue, why there's an issue about the violation of land rights when putting in the pipeline. So I'm going to reach out I interviewed a number of people who were filmmakers for the Indigenous Film Festival and see if we might be able to have them on the program. And then we are going to, there was a red, I get the title wrong, but there was a report written by Indigenous women. And I'm going to, we're getting some help from Marion at the Senior Center, Marion Pollock, the president of the board. She was on last week. And she is going to help facilitate getting people not to just come in as a guest, but people who would come in as podcasters. So we're working toward that because that was part of the goals of this new expanded age-friendly city, to have people that represent
the
diversity. Yes.
So now we do have one person now who's here on the screen, Stephen, who's Métis. So we do have someone who has a lived experience of what that's like. I sent him a couple of, oh yes, Women Rising, Red Women Rising.
Yes, that's the one that I was
Yeah.
speaking of. Mhm.
Yeah, I sent a chat to Stephen to see why, to see if he's still in his PJs, and that's why we can't actually see him live and moving.
Yeah, I'm not sure why my video is frozen. I don't know. I mean, all I see is the little thumbprint here that, yeah, I seem to be stuck in one place, don't I?
You are, yes.
With your eyes shut, are you sure you haven't nodded off there?
Well,
I don't know. I might have just nodded off, and who knows? Maybe that's what I'm destined to be for the rest of the podcast. I don't know.
That's what I
Anyway,
said.
it seems that my video is frozen for some reason.
Okay. I said you look like you're sleeping. Are you still in your PJs?
Well, there's a possibility too.
See, all
Who
I see
knows?
is a black screen, so I don't know what happened there.
Okay.
Oh, really?
I think another thing we can do as well, there was the City Planning Council held this summit where they invited people and 19 different topic groups to talk about what would it take us to make a city that works for all. And there was a group called Culture. There was, and within the cultural group, a diverse range of communities were represented, and they said one of the things we need to do is learn about each other. They advocated for longhouses, that one of the structures we need to have is a longhouse.
Yeah.
Stephen, do you know more? Can you talk more about what is a longhouse?
Well, no, I don't know too much about that. That's mainly the First Nations from the coast here, and I'm not too familiar with their culture. My cultural background is from the prairies of Canada, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, so I know the traditions there a little bit, but not so much on the coast here. But yeah, there seem to be longhouses in many different communities here on the coast.
Yeah, well, that was one of the recommendations that was made, that Vancouver establish more longhouses, not just for members of that particular nation, but where people of different ethnic groups who don't have an opportunity to wear some of their heritage dress, to have food, and to exchange it with each other. That would be good. For us to exchange our traditions, and as a way of getting traditions honored, having them honored in the workplace and churches and so forth, if we had a number of longhouses. So that speaks a bit too to the cultural question.
So in coming to the end of the podcast, but not the end of this conversation, if you had to reiterate what you shared to answer the question in a more direct way, which is, what would a city that truly adopts reconciliation and decolonization look like? And you can obviously answer that in a way that speaks to your positionality as a white Anglo-Saxon whatever, or as a senior, or as a racialized person. It's all up to you. But if you had to reiterate everything that you've shared, what would that city that truly adopts decolonization, reconciliation look like?
For me, it would be a population of more educated white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, Europeans, more in tune with the indigenous population. For me, that would be the starting point. It would have to be for me.
Yeah.
Before any specifics were addressed.
Yeah. Another thing that strikes me as something that would be very easy for the city to do, and that's to get rid of all the street names that say Prince this,
King, Prince,
all of the royal names
Agreed.
that are a hangover from colonization, right? I mean, it might not, it doesn't seem like a very deep thing, but I think it would trigger a lot more thought. Instead of, oh, I live on King Edward. No, yes. So that would at least provide people with some kind of a touchstone. I know a lot of people would be really pissed off.
They would, yeah, they would. I have to say that in the West End here, we have a few lanes now that have been renamed with
Yes.
women, the names of women, and
Yes.
the names of some indigenous.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
it's a start, I suppose.
Yes. Yes. I know they're doing that in the West End, but there's so many streets in Vancouver that have nothing to do with, I mean, there's more streets in Vancouver that have to do with colonization than they have to do with the people who lived here first on the land.
Okay.
Oh, it's just a thought. And it's
That's a good
something,
thought. Yeah.
yeah, it's something that I think it would be difficult in terms of communication and learning, but it's very easy to actually change the signs on the streets.
I think public meetings, it seemed that as there are different holidays, the different groups, people of different nationalities have things that they celebrate. And if just the mainstream, if the media or CBC as a Canadian broadcasting system or the national news, if they highlighted different times, they will just highlight maybe one or two things, but there are hundreds of different holidays and customs. It could be slotted into the weekend news or slotted into spaces so that people just learn from seeing it, because what people see on TV or what they see on the big screen, they take as being the culture or the standard of the place. So I think advocating for that in letters that we write, tweet or whatever to the national media, that would be one way of encouraging them to be more inclusive and make it normal to see different cultures, different traditions, different ways people celebrate than the way it's done now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because one of the things I know about Ramadan, but I don't know anything about, I know about Louis Real, but that's about as far as my knowledge of Indigenous holidays goes. I mean, I know there is one day that is called Indigenous Day nationally. I used to remember the date, but it's gone right now. It's the 25th.
You mean June 21st?
That's right.
Yes.
June 21st, first
Yes.
day of summer. That's right. Yes. Thank you, Stephen, even though you've disappeared totally now.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I've just turned a totally black screen. I don't know. Anyway, it is June 21st, and that's National Indigenous Day. That's right.
That's right. Thank you.
And what a shame that it's just one day when we have a month for Women's Month, a month for Nutrition Month, a month for Poetry Month. So that's something that we could do to advocate and broaden, even in what we plan to do during June. You know, there's some things during June. What are we going to do for podcasts for doing Pride Week happens at different times during the different provinces, but I think we might want to think ahead of, is there special broadcasts? Some of the different issues, such as what Chris mentioned about immigrant workers, some of the LGBTQ issues that happen among within the unions. I mean, some of the other areas besides just the typical things that people discuss. How can we press to give a greater, broader look into what does pride mean? What are we proud about, or what's been accomplished, and where is there still work to be done? And how can we address that both through cultural presentations as well as interviews? June is right around the corner, so those of you who've been creating and presenting can start thinking and suggesting. Because I'll let each of you know, everybody does have a mentor. We haven't talked that much about the role of a mentor, because when we were meeting all together, there were different times when some of you would stay up in a small group and work with me, some would be in a small group working down with Luke, some would be with Robin, but now we're all here together. So we've kind of divided people up so that some of you, like if you have a phone call from Adele, or you have a phone call from me, or a phone call from Robin, it's because we're trying to establish it sometimes aside from our podcast time, when you could talk ideas about content and talk ideas about ways to, if we have an 8-minute time, for example, of stories, do we need to mix some music in? What are the breaks we need to do? We're looking at both the style as well as the content. So your ideas are welcome and input are welcome. We also with Peggy from the Senior Affairs Council. We want to look at, are there topics like for next week and as we go into June, are there particular topics that you want to make sure that you have a priority for? Ellen, when you talked about the fact that seniors still need to work, a lot of people don't picture that. So is that something that you'd like to see us have a discussion about and maybe get someone that we can interview or that's in their portfolio from a city or provincial standpoint?
Sure, yeah. Yeah. That's we can have that next week. Characteristics of healthy workforce, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And of opportunities to get back to work, because someone said one of the backlashes that might happen with COVID is people will think that older people are at greater risk, and so they will be even less hired because people are free. The perception is we're the people that can make people sick, whereas actually we're at greater risk from being sick from others. But just to get some clarification, pull people in who could talk about, I think, as you said, the need to highlight ways that we could still get employment that is at a living wage. Is that paraphrasing kind of what you said, Owen?
Yeah, that's right.
What is another topic that we would shoot for, both even having somebody we could interview or that we might have a special presentation that one of you might want to do?
I did notice, Charlotte, that we seem to have quite a number of activists on board, and I'm really interested in that. I finally got to see Granny Power, about the Raging Grannies, and I've done written a thing about it. But it seems to me that I by no means would call myself an activist, but I do know people who have spent their lives being activists, and I've got some wonderful quotes from this Granny Power movie about that. So I just wondered if there was anything there. And as you know, using the Raging Grannies as a kind of a theme, activism then, activism now, is it as effective? The Occupy movement, I don't know much about that. But also you can mix it up, because Raging Grannies were known for their songs, their satirical songs. And so if we have anyone musical in our bunch, maybe they would like to sing some or something like that, just to shake it up a bit. But anyway, that's a topic that I think is interested to pursue. I don't think I'm the person to do it, but I think we have lots of activists in our numbers here.
Yes. And that's the thing that Marion had an appointment that she couldn't miss today, but that's one of the things that she's been a lifetime activist. And if we wanted to connect with who are some of the activists and issues that we could get engaged in, because beyond just hearing about activists, what can we do? What are things that we can do now? What can we put on people's plates?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. What about, do we want to do something throughout June, or how will we address pride issues, and what pride issues do we want to do during June? Maybe Chris.
I would like to suggest in BC, in Vancouver, we don't do June, we do August.
Oh, okay.
In part because there's, across the country, so many people do it in June. And so if you want to go to Toronto Pride and you're having your own Pride here, then you can't do both. So our Pride, and I know that they're planning something virtual for Pride because we can't have a parade this year. So I think August would be better for that. I think in June, because June 1st is Seniors Day, there's that week, the first week of June is Seniors Week.
Really?
So that, yes,
Because, October 1st is International Seniors Day. That's when we did the big showcase of our podcast. But yes, we could look at...
Right. But here in Vancouver, it's designated more or less as the first week of June. The Arts, Health, and Seniors program has a big showcase. Now this year it's going to be different, and we're not going to have one. So there are, and lots of community centers do things in that early June for Seniors Week. And then the other thing, I think, because June 21st is the National Indigenous Day, I think maybe we should spend a bit of time looking at that.
Yeah.
Maybe we could get I'm not sure what all the Red Ribbon report contains, whether that would be a time we want to have some excerpts from it, or maybe we could talk a bit, offline about what resources we want to give. Because if there's some things that people could read, the point that you made that educate ourselves, if there are things we could read maybe the week before we have the podcast, so that we could have a richer discussion about those things. I think June 21st or sometime during that week, it's also National or International Test Week. It's a time to remind people to get tested for HIV. The date, you could look into that. Okay, well, we have had a wonderful conversation. We know somewhere of where we're going. Sylvie, there's some other people from that are interested in the Granny Power discussion, and so we'll work to try and maybe connect a Zoom call with you and some people from that small group when we were meeting that were really interested in that topic, and see what we can do with making that a topic for next week, and then working toward the Senior Week for the first week, when we go into June.
Yeah.
The first Thursday in June. Okay, well, at this point, I would sing a song. I'm an old, I don't know who remembers the Mickey Mouse Club. It was so hokey when they'd say, and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's a wonderful time in our neighborhood. And I'm so glad that you've been my neighbors. We've been neighbors together today and learned more about each other, and we know where we're going. So thank you so much for another day of Powered by Age, Age-Friendly City, Ambassadors at Large. And thank you for being our special guest. You're welcome to continue with us, Shamal.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It was a beautiful conversation.
Yeah, I have a question. Are we going to invite Ishmael back to discuss some of these other questions that he has?
The only one other question that I have that we didn't explore today is in regards to the workplace and workforce. What are the characteristics of a healthy workplace and workforce? And
yeah, that's not really relevant to retired people, but you typed up a couple of others too, one about arts and culture and one about safety.
Well, we talked about that the first week.
Okay.
We had those questions, and the very first podcast discussion, we were playing with the tool that Luke had. Do we still have that tool? The question
video? Yeah. We haven't got there yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, it's something we'll be able to use where a person asks a question and then the group answers it, or whoever wants to answer it. So it's just another fun thing. When we say this podcast is fun, it's another fun thing that we'll be able to do. We also will be exploring maybe in some of the individual or small group conversations we work, as our mentoring production assistants work with, we might be looking at what a Google Meet looks like or sounds like. And you might have noticed, it might be something that might have happened to part of our group. Now, when you open Zoom or you open your calendar, Google Meet jumps up and says, do you want to meet? And if you don't understand, it seems like it's part of Zoom. And so I had a couple of people yesterday that went into, they did touch the yes for Google Meets, and it took them to a different meeting room. So just be aware of that, or if you're talking with other people that use virtual communications, that if they ever see, if they're expecting to go to a Zoom meeting using Zoom, and when you open or start to try and go there, if meet, want to meet, or the word meet pops up, or activate the meet microphone, don't do that because it'll take you to a different meeting. You have any comments or thoughts, Luke?
No, I just, maybe one little point. We've had over 200 listens in the last 3 weeks on the podcast, so it's really been blowing up. So it's great.
That's without any advertising. Oh, someone asked, what are those when you put it on Anchor, what are the different platforms it goes to?
Different ones are Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple. There's a whole bunch actually, but those are the big ones.
Mm-hmm. And iTunes, right?
iTunes, yeah.
FaceTime?
FaceTime?
Yeah, but I think that's more phone sort of stuff, isn't it?
FaceTime is just like a video conversation tool.
Yeah, it's sort of like Skype. It's the Apple version of Skype, right?
Oh, okay.
So you can now tell your friends that they can hear you on all the places that they listen to podcasts. And some people are more familiar with, the name Spotify or iTunes. But could you tell a little bit about the PBA website?
Yeah, we're just getting it together right now, but it's going to have basically every episode that we do. We can attach some metadata to it, so maybe the conversations we talk about, or the participants, if they want to have their name included, or any kind of stuff like that. Just another way to get the word out on the podcast. poweredbyage.com.
And any of you who would like to get more technically involved, you can watch how people hashtag other things, so we can look at hashtags we might want to use. If there's a limited amount of metadata that you can put into the platforms, the podcast platforms, but when you're if you're making an entry on Facebook or LinkedIn, you can add hashtags. So you could have a hashtag like senior environment issues, or other hashtags, so that people will know when they go to that spot, they'll hear discussions around those things. So we'll learn more about hashtags, but that's just one of the ways that people are able to search for and find that we have a podcast on something.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have to get going. It was nice chatting with you all, and Charlotte, we will continue by email.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you,
also.
Ishmael. Those were really stimulating questions. So thank you for that.
And are you still
Welcome.
welcoming?
Bye-bye, Ishmael.
Absolutely. If at any time think of a potential project or initiative or event that could be co-organized between Age Friendly and UBC students, then I could get you in touch with my colleague who is responsible for example, for identifying volunteers. And between you and I, we could also have a conversation potentially about a specific project that maybe some students who are part of a course or who are there on a volunteering capacity can support you. But I think, in resources available at the Center for Community Engaged Learning, and if there's an opportunity maybe for Friendly Age to see these programs or resources, and we could have a conversation about that.
Okay, say the name again. Center for
Community Engaged Learning. That's where I work.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome, Charlotte. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Ishmael.